Thank you very much, Guy. I suppose a lot of what I'll be doing is summing up in certain ways a lot of the themes that have already been hit upon today. But as Guy mentioned, we've been looking for a few months now at the types of trends and changes that are likely to, I suppose, get business out of that world where it can still be a moral imperative that guides you to look at sustainability into a place where it's likely to really have significant material impact on you and force these changes that go beyond, as Duncan called them, that sort of scratching the surface. So I suppose if Stephen Howard gave you headlines from 30 years ago to start off this morning, I'm going to try and give you some headlines from 30 years from now. And those essentially are the backdrop to some of the big ideas that we've heard, but also will probably be the drivers for your big ideas moving forward. So I'll try and give you sort of a very quick summary of lots of different things we've observed that we think are likely to really shift business in the coming times. And I suppose my question to you is your big idea, as you formulate it for the first time, or refine it, or shift it as you face changes in budgets or government policy, is it ready for the future that we have to come? So where will your big idea live? We know that the world is changing. That's a complete platitude in today's business world. But I suppose often we think that the big changes are coming now, but I would challenge you to think, was there ever a time when there was business as usual? So let's think about the sort of turbulence that we're looking at in the coming years. We certainly know that one of the biggest drivers that pushes a lot of sustainability challenges forward is a huge growth in population. But of course, if you work in business, you might also say that that's probably the biggest consumer market we have ever seen coming in future years, moving up towards 9 billion in 2050. That's a growth that will be happening in very disproportionate ways. We heard that economic growth is shifting from west to east, but as is population growth. So if I flash forward to 2050, this is just a map of how population will be expanding by then. If I flash forward to 2050, in the UK, we may then, by then, have an almost equal ratio of people under 65 and people above 65 years old. So that creates a very, very, very different market here and lots of different challenges there. Meanwhile, in the rest of the world, and the economies that we know are already growing very quickly, and the many, many countries that we heard will be joining those, we'll be looking at a very speedy growth, but not a growth just of population as we know it. The people that we today call the other 4 billion, the dispossessed, the people who have much less money, the people who require these business models that are based on lower prices and higher volume, will by then be larger than the entire population of the world today. So have you got the sort of business models ready to cater to these people? These people will also be living more than ever in urban centres, mostly unplanned urban centres that will feel the pinch of resource shortages such as water more strongly than anywhere else before, just as they start tapping into new lifestyles that, as we heard this morning, they will feel are quite rightly theirs, not just as something that is appealing, but something they deserve. So if we look at just one example, such as food, as families that today, this is from a photographic project that looks at how people eat around the world, as they move from these sorts of diets to these sorts of diets, we're likely to see, by 2030, require a 50% increase in the food that we produce today. And that's not obviously just in the food we produce, but in the food we distribute, in the food we sell. How does it get to places? And that's clearly going to just that single challenge is going to require business working in very, very effective ways, because the growth levels that those require are very significant. Which means looking at business is very effective. And I stress effective rather than efficient, because I think we always look at business needs to be more efficient. That suggests that we're doing what we do today in more efficient ways. I think some of what we've heard in the big ideas already this morning is that that's probably not going to cut it and not going to get us to the results we need. So it's probably about reinventing the ways in which we deliver a lot of things. If we just look at the world of food as an example, that's particularly challenging, because I think we also heard about the constraints and the huge growth in demand of food as key ingredient, which today is oil. We know it's a requirement for energy. It's also a requirement for lots of other industries, and we don't necessarily understand that in those ways. It's also the key ingredient of most of the things that surround us, the objects that we have, not just energy, as this sort of recent piece from a French magazine shows. So how are we going to look at that? What does a world that reinvents the objects around us look like moving into the future, including money itself in some countries, now an oil-based product? So moving beyond that, how does that affect our supply chains, our ability to ship things around the world, our mobility, even at a personal level? We'll probably need to look at cost constraints perhaps, but also resource constraints. What does that mean when the things that we use as a business every day, natural resources, clean air, fresh water, may also be suddenly protected by legislation or protected by the communities themselves that depend on these things, that have arranged themselves to go, actually, we need this too. That is the constraint side. Of course, that means tremendous opportunities and tremendous requirements for businesses to be very, very innovative. For example, in this slightly unusual suggestion for personal mobility that's already attracted a few $1 million investment from Google. So lots of different ways to explore how we're going to address some of the challenges that face us as we move forward. It also means things like waste. This is the cell phones that are disposed of on an annual basis in the EU. We'll probably have to turn into business resources, and we're already seeing new businesses starting to explore how can waste actually in a closed-loop business become your primary resource. Looking beyond that to changes in lifestyles, the world of health, we heard already, is probably likely to be transformed already. As new technology comes on board, that also means being able to predict lifetime health needs in a much more fundamental way from birth, and understanding really how people are going to need to evolve through their life, and probably, certainly in Western nations, shift their lifestyles also. That means lots of opportunities in products and services that help us guide our own behaviors, and may talk to us in different ways and help us make the right choices in life as we fight sort of seemingly contradictory problems now in different parts of the world around how we live, how we access resources, and then our own behaviors. There will be shifts in the world of work as it becomes something not that we necessarily go to every day, but something we just do in the midst of our normal lives as technology breaks apart our separation, our belonging to physical space for work. And that probably also means that the borders of your offices will now be completely international and not necessarily rely solely on employees, but lots of different participants in how you work. Technology will also fragment how money and finances is passed around. So in Kenya, technology called M-Pesa allows people to exchange money just amongst themselves on mobile phones, represents now about 20% of the GDP. So real changes there. As work changes, how people interact with companies changes. So I think even we're growing to cease to distinguish employees and consumers and understand that actually a lot of people have the same motivation. So how we connect to companies is changing very quickly. Certainly entering an area of absolute transparency. Today already you can use a little iPhone app to run down your supermarket aisle and find out the environmental history of any product that has a barcode on shelf, i.e. anything. What does that mean when people want to interact with you and share back their opinions in their company, whether they are right or wrong? It leads to a world where people are a bit more aware of their impacts, and perhaps while going to a water park in one place are more aware that that means queues elsewhere. And I think we're seeing that increasingly through the way that we relate to world news and how quickly the slight domino effect that we've observed in the Middle East recently has taken off. When consumers know more about you, they are likely to become more vocal on the important issues or the non-important issues. You may be doing an amazing amount of stuff and have a tremendous CSR record, but if a few hundred Twitterers want to talk about your logo, that's the dialogue that you need to suddenly engage in. A more vocal audience, a more local audience. We're seeing lots of communities organize themselves in a different way, reinvent their currencies, reinvent the ways in which they trade ideas, goods, and skills amongst themselves, not always leaving a place for business as it has operated traditionally. This, for example, is just a picture of the current community-led renewable energy initiatives in the UK. And then finally, a much more connected world of consumers or simply people. So just in the US today, the world of collaborative consumption, people exchanging goods and services amongst themselves, is worth 36 billion and growing very rapidly. So as people become their own companies, as they sell off what they had before or exchange things with people around them, their interest in co-creating your company is increasing. So what role can people play in defining your future and not just being the recipients of the products and services that you develop for them? So a few provocations for you in terms of what we've collected from trends and figures today about the world tomorrow. So hopefully some things to carry into your thinking about what your big idea might be. Thank you.